Welcome from Scotland, dear 1000 PS TV viewers. I was allowed to be on the road here for 4 days with the Kawasaki Versys 1000S. I experienced 4 big and small surprises along the way. Stay tuned and I'll tell you which ones. It's not the first time I've gone on tour with the Versys. In fact, I've already toured 4 different countries in Europe with it. But those trips were a few years ago and my experience with other tourers has grown considerably in the meantime. In the run-up to the trip, I was therefore particularly curious to see whether and how much my newly acquired experiences with the NT1100, Tracer, Mandello & Co. could change my perception of the big Versys. To date, the Green Tourer from Japan represents a truly superior overall concept for me. 4 days and more than 1,300 kilometers on Scottish roads have now shown me quite clearly how it really stands around the Kawasaki Versys 1000S in 2023. My journey begins at the local Kawasaki dealer in Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland. The tour group, consisting of a handful of journalists, tour guide, 2 Kawasaki employees and me, will spend most of the tour in the legendary Highlands. The way to the Green Paradise consists of urban areas, highway and unspectacular country roads. On the way to the northwest, I now have a good 3 hours to check my suitability for everyday use and my mileage-guzzling qualities without being distracted by breathtaking landscapes. The very first impression is on the parking lot of Kawasaki Edinburgh. When maneuvering, it is noticeable that the Versys is one of the heaviest of its kind. 259.5 kilograms, weighed on the incorruptible 1000 pascals, are no joy when pushing the machine. All the more surprising is the fact that the Versys can be lifted effortlessly onto the main stand. The supposedly expected feat of strength is absent. The stylish side panniers, which conveniently conceal the bulky rear end, are quite easy to load, especially thanks to the practical inner pockets. I highly recommend these, by the way, since the aesthetically shaped cases, like all of their kind, open to the side and not upwards. Interior pockets simply save nerves here when loading. The 47 liters top case works inconspicuously and increases the load capacity to 103 liters. With 220 kilograms possible payload, you can actually use this storage space properly. With most modern travel heavyweights, their mass is no longer noticeable once they start moving. The Versys is no exception. On the contrary, slow stop and go in city traffic could even be called one of its parade disciplines, especially compared to twin-cylinder machines. The silky inline 4 responds smoothly and yet without artificial delay. The clutch requires little manual force and can be dosed flawlessly. The center of gravity seems low enough, riding at walking pace is easy and not an undignified tremor. The brakes are also convincing with wonderful dosing. Only 2 circumstances cause slight irritations in Edinburgh city traffic: left-hand traffic and quickshifter. You can quickly get used to driving on the wrong side. Behind a tour guide or within a motorcycle group it is relatively easy anyway. The quickshifter at low speeds, on the other hand, is a bit more difficult to digest. Without proper propulsion, it takes a lot of pressure on the shift lever in places. Sometimes the assistant even quits the service completely. The picture is similar for downshifting. Often a really strong kick downwards is required, and in some RPM situations the gear change is completely denied. However, there are also gear changes at low speeds that happen completely effortlessly. So it's quite possible that long-term owners can learn when and where the automatic gear shift works well. However, it is definitely certain that most competitor quickshifters work better. The capricious gear changes thus remain the only annoyance that is noticeable in the city. The overall urban impression, however, is still decidedly positive. The bike feels well balanced, manhole covers and other knocks from below are pleasantly dampened, throttle and brake are finely controllable, the seat height of 840 mm is okay. The engine does not radiate any heat towards the rider and can stay in 6th gear up to just under 40 km per hour without any jerkiness. After the successful escape from Edinburgh, we hit the highway for just under an hour. At first, the somewhat laborious windshield adjustment is still unpleasantly noticeable, because it requires 2 hands instead of 1. Of course, the cruise control invites you to let go of the right side of the handlebars, but for safety reasons I wouldn't recommend it. especially because the cruise control feature on the Versys sometimes requires a little more attention than one is used to. The speed adjustment requires endless button presses on the left control unit. The set speed is only sporadically shown on the display, and sometimes it fluctuates up and down in the range of up to 5 km per hour, sometimes to the understandable annoyance of drivers in the rearview mirror. Nevertheless, cruise control is an indispensable comfort feature for me, even on the Versys. In truth, it also doesn't manage to detract at all from the overall positive impression, because this Kawasaki is actually really good on highways. The Versys windshield was for me for a long time the best ever. In the high position, any form of uncomfortable air is reliably blown over my 184 centimeters. I always wear hearing protection on highway stages, the Versys being one of the few exceptions where it wouldn't be necessary. Then there's the finely responsive chassis and, above all, a really high quality filled seat cushion, which also turns out to be very wide. You sit royally well here, the nerve-saving high-speed performance is almost fun. The rearview mirrors offer perfect visibility, unpleasant vibrations are hardly noticeable up to Austrian highway speeds. Only at German speeds, typically driven by notorious left-turners, does it start to tickle a bit in the crotch. If you don't like this, just slide a bit further away from the tank. Then these vibrations are hardly noticeable. In my opinion, only the Honda NT1100 manages to top the Kawa in terms of wind protection these days. The lead, however, is a small one, and it doesn't change the fact that the Versys 1000 is a mile either out of the picture book. During the journey, it became apparent that our test bike performs impressively confidently in the city, on the highway and on less exciting country roads. But only the curves and partly adventurous roads of the Highlands will now prove how much Kawasaki's versatile system really lives up to its name. Slow, fast and boring works, except for minimal deductions, already very well. The Versys successfully spares my nerves during the more tedious aspects of motorcycle travel. But how does it look in the saddle of the Kawasaki on the fun side of the vacation? Not only do the Scottish Highlands have incredibly great scenery to offer, but the road construction in the north is also really something to behold. The majority of the roads we rode on were in the best condition, and the Scottish asphalt gives very good grip. The radii there are rather wide, and our group moves at a decent pace through the landscape. The first thing that stands out is the fine handling of the machine. Thanks to the 17 inches front wheel, the Versys can be thrown effortlessly into the radius. An impressive neutrality is offered in lean angles, steering corrections are implemented readily, and without an increased pulse. Nothing is felt of the just under 260 kilograms up to the braking zone. The brakes work flawlessly and can be finely dosed even in brisk mode. But the higher total weight means that you can't expect any brutal miracles when braking. The suspension primarily offers comfort. However, it does not achieve this through long suspension travel and an exaggeratedly cozy damping behavior, but through decent and high-quality components. You feel an astonishingly fine and smooth response, especially for this price range. You are neither bounced over blows nor rocked over them. Your own butt may instead enjoy a pleasant damping. This makes it possible that this decidedly comfortable chassis can also thoroughly impress in terms of sportiness. Only at the touring speed of madness, where direction changes are performed with the knife between the teeth and at Mud P speed, does the chassis start to sway slightly and no longer sufficiently keep up with the damping. From my own experience, I know that the semi-active suspension variant of the C offers a bit more stability and thus reserves in attack mode. For my own demands for proper grip in lean angles, however, the analog variant of the S is totally satisfactory. The clean response of the suspension elements provides proper satisfaction for my sensitive motorcycle self on good and bad roads. The biggest phenomenon for me, however, is the engine. At least two completely different personalities live in the housing of the inline four-cylinder. The former Z engine is inconspicuous, tame, sober and at the same time emotional, exciting and unreasonable. At low speeds, it shines with incredibly smooth engine running. A sovereign, unobtrusive four-cylinder sound coupled with surprisingly useful pressure from the rev range. If the throttle is then turned more briskly, a completely different picture presents itself. The needle of the analog tachometer shoots upwards, the usable pressure develops into a real punch at higher revs. The dominant hissing of the airbox tempts to asocially high revs. The quickshifter finally works as it should. The Versys goes from tourer to executioner and can't keep up with the Tracer and XR until the speeds get downright and unreasonably high. At the same time, the Versys doesn't involuntarily seduce me into speeding. Some motorcycles are simply more fun the faster you go. Also in the touring range. The Kawasaki, however, can shine with such pleasant damping and effortless handling that even the small, winding and bumpy roads or generally a slow connoisseur's pace are a real pleasure. The scenery of the Scottish Highlands is so impressive most of the time that I almost always opt for the leisurely pace. In fact, I couldn't think of a motorcycle on site that I would have felt more comfortable on. At least not within the same price range. In addition to the already mentioned and largely negligible drawbacks of the Versys, I find it enormously difficult to find any other points of criticism. Perhaps I should mention its fuel consumption at this point. It averaged 6.1 liters per 100 kilometers during my 4-day trip, and is thus a bit higher than some competing products. However, if you calculate how much more you have to pay on average with an additional consumption of 1 liter during a week-long motorcycle tour, then actually this point of criticism is also negligible. The range itself is around 350 km per 21-liter tank filling and is thus adequate. The service interval of 12,000 km is also okay. My conclusion on the Kawasaki Versys 1000S. The Kawasaki Versys 1000S is relatively easy to rank in terms of its competition, even if the title of best compromise doesn't seem glamorous at all. In truth, however, it's a very high accolade as a workable compromise between comfort and sportiness needs a lot of engineering experience and also decent components. Kawasaki builds motorcycles with decency, and this is evident in their decidedly fair pricing policy. The Versys 1000S can be bought in various packages, but these only refer to travel equipment such as panniers, GPS mount, etc. Other extras like quickshifter and cruise control are always included at no extra cost. In my opinion, there is no other road tour in their price range that manages the balancing act of comfortable and brisk similarly well. When I think about how many people out there ride touring enduros without ever going off-road, I can only shake my head. Gravel is also possible with the Versys, and at the same time the road is simply more fun, thanks to 17 inches and great suspension. So, dear travel enduro rider without off-road ambitions, please take a test ride with the Kawasaki Versys 1000S, you will not regret it. Thank you for watching. Feel free to leave a comment and like the video.